It wasn't that long ago that the tech lead put out a video boasting about his 500K salary at Facebook. And now many of you might be like, wow, 500K, that seems like the tippity top of salaries for a software engineer at Facebook. How could it get any better than $500,000 a year? Well, I'm here to kind of dispel that myth, as recently posted on Medium, there was a software engineer that decided to post an article where they discussed their $2 million salary at Facebook. And I wanted to kind of go through their progression at Facebook and how they went from, again, a pretty base level salary for a software engineer at Facebook to a pretty ridiculous $2 million, because it's definitely very rare. And let's be honest, some of you might not even be believing that number. But as I browsed through their article, I could kind of see why they got the salary that they did, despite the comments that were kind of in the article, arguably saying that it was a waste of money. We're going to go through this article and kind of see why this software engineer was paid $2 million and kind of the impact that they had at a large tech company that has somewhere in the range of like a 30 or 50% profit margin. So, paying someone $2 million a year is not that crazy when they provide a crazy amount of value. Now, the one question I do have and that I've been thinking about is, for this person, would it have been better for them to take their skills, which were clearly good enough to start a company based on what they talked about, and instead of focusing it on a company that already exists, create something brand new and make their own startup? And arguably, probably, they could have taken those skills and made tens of millions, if not maybe $100 million versus just $2 million. So let's dive into this article by an engineer who clearly is wanting to be very anonymous. They wrote this article sometime last year. Now, one thing I'd like to point out is that this engineer was performing at the top of their class, in the top 1% apparently of engineers. But I think another thing that they didn't necessarily go through that much or clearly specify was something about their level. So if we go down this, and they do end up talking a little bit about their grant and the fact that they're only actually considering the grant at the initial value. So honestly, if this person still is holding on to Facebook share, they have made way more than they're actually letting on even here. So that's just crazy to think about how much money they've actually made. But let's kind of scroll down here and see what level they ended up at. So if we scroll down here, you'll notice that by year 9, they were an E8. And now, here's the thing about E8 software engineers, for those who don't know. E5 is essentially probably where the tech lead was. He might have been E5, E6. That's kind of what you consider a tech lead at most tech companies. It's usually like E5. Some of them might be called something similar in terms of leveling, but in general, somewhere in that level is kind of a tech lead. So that's probably where the non-controversial tech lead was. Based on the fact that he had a 500K salary, I'd say it was probably E6. Now, E6 is also kind of considered manager. So this is something you might not know about Facebook, is they try to create a parallel path between high-level individual contributors and high-level managers. That is to say that an E6 is actually comparable with, I think it's like M2. And let's kind of dive into that into this Forbes article where they broke this down, just so I'm only using public information and not personal insider info. So if we scroll down here, so you can see these are the levels that they're discussing. So E3, again, kind of an IC, individual contributor. E4, still kind of the same, but you've got some level of taking things on for yourself. M0, so this is where you first start taking on this kind of manager role. You could, if you wanted to. It's called M0, which is like baby kind of manager, but it's still kind of where you could start taking on those skills as a manager. E6 is kind of where you're considered an M1. So this is like a legit manager. You can, in theory, go back and forth between these positions if you want to be more of like a very, very high level performing individual contributor, or you want to be more of a manager. That's kind of your route. It's kind of also considered like a staff or principal engineer. Now, E7, again, very high level here. We're talking about manager of managers if you're staying on the managerial route. So you're probably managing other teams' managers more than likely. E7 otherwise is just a super high level, almost elusive software engineer. Again, top 1%. You're probably here. You're probably like top 3, top 5% of software engineers at Facebook. Now, once you get to E8, which is where this person got to, you're essentially a director. Like, you are basically director level. You can interact with directors. And that's not to say that you can't as an IC contributor. In fact, that's encouraged, but the way you interact with it, I think, is different. You're kind of considered at that same level, so you can have a conversation with them, and that has weight. And the big thing here is you're literally driving some component of the business. And we're going to dive into how this engineer actually did that, because I do think it's interesting. I think it's a very interesting path that they took through this article. They really do talk about their growth. And if anyone's here wondering, how do I make, $2 million at a company like Facebook, Google, Amazon, here's the blueprint essentially. Now, some of it's going to be luck, you'll see, I think, in some ways, but also at the same time, I think that they were able to spot an opportunity, and that's really what happened. They saw an opportunity and they grew it. And that's where they really, I think, shined. So let's scroll down through this article and see kind of how they progressed year over year and how they grew from kind of just an IC, which is individual contributor, to a high level, basically director level software engineer. Now, you'll see when they first started out, they were making about 127K base, which is about right, 127 to 150. It depends on how you start, but they also got 280K worth of stock. Now, this was back in 2010, so maybe that's a little bit higher than it might have been now. But if you do the math and consider the fact that this person got it at $50 a share back then, and if they didn't sell at all, just that stock alone, essentially at this point has 7x'd. So, you can end up running the math, but it's well over $1 million alone just in stock. And you get taxed crazy on stock, but you can see how lucky it can be to start at the right company at the right time. In this case, I think Facebook was just a few years old, so it was a great chance for this person. Now, you're also going to notice where they already started to kind of show some signs of leadership, which is they had 3 launches and they built a 4-person team. And this is kind of what any tech company is really looking for. I think a lot of people mistake the fact that you're hired to be like a highly technical person. Although that's true, I always tell people whenever they ask me like how, who stands out at, Facebook or Google, like how do I grow at these positions? And I often say it's not your technical skills. Like a lot of people think it's like, oh, I'm going to like get really good technical skills. I'm going to like learn all these crazy new things. I'm going to learn machine learning. I'm going to learn data engineering, DevOps, all of that. All of that's valuable. All of that provides some usefulness. But if you really want to be highly impactful, regardless of if you go the IC route, which is individual contributor, or director route, you have to be able to impact other people and grow either your idea or your team or something. You're not allowed to essentially just sit there and do work, like, solve a problem that no one else can solve. I mean, more than likely, companies like Facebook, Google, Amazon hire very smart people. Someone can solve the problem technically. That's not the hard part. Finding opportunities, what to build, that's generally what they look for. And you'll also notice they got 112K of refreshers. So that means on every year in the future, they're essentially getting an extra 25K of stock, which again, if that was at $50 a share, that's now upwards of 700K, just that little chunk there. Now, year 2, they talk about becoming a tech lead. So this person was moving very quickly, right? Like becoming a tech lead, they were clearly jumping on a lot of opportunities, and probably more than likely, they came at a time where Facebook had tons of opportunities, right? 2010. This isn't to say that these companies don't still have them. It's just obviously it's going to be a little more work and there's a lot more competition in terms of who you're competing with. And again, in year 2, they're promoted to E6, which is crazy fast. So I don't know what this person's background was, but to be promoted from E4 to E5 to E6 within a 2-year span is pretty fast, I'd say. I don't think a lot of people get promoted that quickly, but sometimes if you find the right project, if you do the right things, it happens. And again, you'll see that they also, again, grew a team to 10 engineers. So they're now almost borderline managing 10 people, right? That's why they're a tech lead. They're now basically managing a team. They're essentially a manager, but they're kind of maybe playing more of just a technical role versus purely a managerial role. So they might be like guiding like decisions of design and trying to like nurture younger talent and things of that nature, rather than trying to like straight up just manage them and grow them and, unblock them. And so that's a very different kind of role overall. And now if we keep scrolling down, you'll notice that they left their last team, which is kind of a probably good thing to do every so often to make sure you don't get too stale and you get interesting new problems to figure out. And here's where they took a risk, which is in 6 months, they basically had gotten the ability to invest time into a specific product. This is very unique, right? Like they actually are essentially building a product. And this is kind of why I said like this person probably could have started their own startup. If they were able to find value somewhere inside of, a company, they probably could have been able to find value outside of the company and start something somewhere and maybe have made, again, upwards of $20 million versus their probably $10 million here at Facebook. Again, I'm like pretending like $10 million isn't a ton of money. And of course it is. Like I am not even close to touching that amount of money. But at the same time, it's one of those things that you have to think it's like a trade-off. If you start your own startup and you're this good, because clearly, again, this person just had natural talent, I assume, like if you're managing 12 people and assumingly probably good technically, you probably could take that same talent and move it over into developing your own products and starting your own startup. But again, that's hard to say because there's so much risk when it comes to starting your own startup. You just as easily could build nothing or provide a service that just has no value. But again, just seeing someone that has this skill makes me think like I'm sure this person could have developed some sort of product and started a 12-person team and really built something interesting outside of Facebook. And now they're really starting to kind of grow up and kind of be, again, manager of managers, right? To scale the team, we had to split into 4 sub teams. Again, they're discussing the concept of managers at this point, right? Like they are no longer acting as a tech lead of this 12-person team, they're acting as like this upper echelon tech lead, and there's other mini tech leads underneath them. So again, this is where they start getting that M2, leveling. And this is where Facebook, in their kind of what we do is like calibrations, would see that and automatically be like, wow, this person is causing it to happen. They're literally doing exactly what they're supposed to. This is literally arguably the blueprint of what would almost be required for you to get to a high level IC position at Facebook or Google or any, again, tech company. It's just very hard to do. Again, they clearly have the skills to manage a team, because so far they've managed a 12-person team, which is difficult enough, and, refurbished an old product, which is also a challenge. So they clearly have the skill, and they're clearly going in the right path. So the funny thing is, like, here's the answer if anyone ever wants to know how you get promoted at these, larger tech companies. The problem is it's very hard to do, and you do need the skills to do it, because managing, again, 2 people is hard. Managing 12 people, it must just be mind-bogglingly difficult. And now you can see that their compensation, this is where it almost basically became $1 million, even though, again, it says that actually was basically $1 million because of the appreciation of their stock, which, again, they're not including it here. But like I said earlier, currently Facebook stock is somewhere near, like, I think 350. Back then, it used to be probably close to 200 or something, or 150. So it at least tripled from their initial grant. So that alone makes sense. Now, again, here's where they actually kind of start talking about it. Given that sub-teams were now operating independently really well, my role diminished, and I switched teams to start a new one with 4 engineers within 6 months. So again, this person was making things happen. Honestly, they're on a different level, at least if this is exactly what they did, because it's so hard. Like, I personally, I think that's one of the hard things about me thinking about when I want to maybe switch teams is, like, because we're graded every 6 months, it's almost scary to switch teams, because you're like, will I calibrate fast enough to this team that I'll produce enough that I will be leveled correctly? And that's a very hard move to make. But again, they grew their team to 8 engineers by the end of the year. And so again, they're just kind of constantly showing that they're able to grow teams. At this point, it's 2015. So maybe it makes sense. Maybe this was a big growth moment for Facebook. Not to say that it's obviously not still growing, but it's kind of interesting to see. Now, as I said, like me and many other people, they actually discussed the fact that because they switched teams and they were growing this team, they actually got lower ratings than they were used to. But they were still given an additional grant of nearly $1 million and were promoted to E7, again, manager of managers. So it clearly wasn't that bad. And I think they must have still gotten a decent enough rating, and they were doing the right things. They just were kind of growing in the moment. And this is where their compensation starts to go wild in year 6. This is where we start seeing that over $1 million worth of compensation, again, not including the appreciation of stock. And if you see, again, they continued to build another product, and they also ended up building 3 new products in the same time, because I guess the first one was too small. And now this person is managing 15 engineers. Again, that's a huge team by any standards, especially if there's only really 1 or 2 people managing it. So clearly they're doing a good job, and clearly they had a second product. So again, lots of big growth, and again, another near $1 million stock grant. And now if we keep scrolling down, we can kind of see where they end up getting promoted to E8 in year 7. So in year 7, they like to mention the fact that their product started getting mentioned by the M team, which is essentially like, it's the top team, right? Like, this is like, you're talking about Mark looking at your product. You're talking about the upper echelons of people referencing your work directly. So clearly, again, if that's the level you're playing at, you're essentially arguably some level of director. And that's where they were essentially promoted to E8 and got another equity grant of $1.2 million. Like, again, this is just crazy to see this. Again, they were actually seeing top line growth. So actual income being driven by their specific product. So again, it makes sense why they were given this salary. And now they kind of go into it a little more about kind of just the post all of this where they're making $2 million, and it kind of all still makes sense. And they're kind of just rounding it out here at the end. They do give a quick TLDR at the very bottom. And I would be curious to see if there'll be future posts where they kind of talk about each, like what they did more specifically. Sadly, I do think the people's comments were pretty harsh. Like, I somehow do get it. Like, this person's article does come off a little bit boasting, right? Like, oh, look how good of an engineer I am. Look, at the end of the day, they were borderline a director. They were not just an engineer. I would say that this person, again, is the top 1% of probably company performers. Like, if you put them arguably almost in any company, I imagine they would do so well in almost any role that they took on. They just clearly have a knack for growing teams, having product sense. Again, they probably could build their own product. Clearly, they built like 4 or 5 products throughout their history at Facebook. They probably could have done the same thing externally and made nearly $100 million rather than just only maybe 10 or 20 million. Again, I'm saying only like it's nothing. It's a lot of money, but for a person that is at this level, whoever they are, it's a very rare skill to have both really strong technical chops and really strong product sense, as well as leadership. Managing and meshing all of those things together is very hard. Oftentimes I find that people are either like very technical or very managerial, and there's very few people that cross that boundary and really are good at both. So that's why, like, there, if you read through the comments, and we'll read through a few. Let's do that now. I'm going to hide my screen because I think I'll be in the way otherwise. So yeah, if we look through this, there's some pretty harsh ones. This first one was actually kind of funny because this is arguably a little bit accurate, right? Like, basically, generally when you think about it, like this 12% joke, it's like, yeah, that's generally what does get bonuses and high ratings, is like being able to increase the top line by, 2% at a company that's making billions of dollars is a huge thing. So, 12% is actually crazy. Like, crap, if you can, increase a company's bottom line by, or top line, or bottom line, I guess it just depends how you look at it, by 1 or 2%, that's insane. But it's a little funny. It's tongue in cheek. And I actually did enjoy this comment a little bit. Some of these other people were a little bit cruel, like, sorry, man, but good example how FB throws away money. I think the reason I'm a little bit against this statement is only because companies like, again, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Google, maybe not Amazon, but all the others, make so much per employee that they could probably actually still pay every employee $100,000 to $200,000 more and still come out profitable, right? Like, these companies have huge profit margins. In fact, let's Google exactly how much profit one employee essentially equates to at a company like Facebook or Apple. Let's look at Statista. I imagine they're kind of accurate. Now, I think this might be general, like maybe gross profit, because everywhere else I've looked, in general, it's a few $100,000 of, I think, net profit. So, if one employee makes several million, I'm going to guess, generally speaking, it's more like $400,000 of borderline net profit. Again, that means they could give away half of that to their employees, essentially, and still make half the net that they did already. So it's just those things to say that, like, yes, we could say throwing away money, but these companies make so much money. It's just on another level. But I do understand, because this can seem like a lot of money, but again, they weren't an engineer, they were a director. And if you look at a director at, a Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan, they might have actually even made more than this person. So, it all just depends on the industry, the company, the profit margins, and things of that nature. With that, hopefully you understand how you too can make millions of dollars working for one of these large tech companies. Again, it's not easy. This person was clearly, again, on a different level. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give a quick moment to smash that like button and subscribe. And I just want to say thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate the fact that we're so close to 10K right now in terms of subscribers. Every one of you are helping me make this possible, and I really appreciate all the support from the community. So thank you so much, and I will talk to you guys next time, and goodbye.